Hello and welcome to the stream. We should be live now. You can always count on technology to let you down just when you need it most. But thank you for your patience and apologies that it took a little while to get the stream started. As I say, I think I'm going to blame technology today. So for anyone that doesn't know, my name is Daniel White. Some of you know me as Dansky. I'm an instructor with Envato Tuts Plus. And well, first of all, Happy New Year. I hope you had a fantastic New Year and happy 2018. I hope it's going really well for you. And you can probably tell I'm a little bit excited because tonight we're going to be jumping into Adobe Illustrator. And whereas normally we focus on one thing and we kind of go quite in depth, we're going to be covering a variety of different topics in Illustrator. So whether you've been using Illustrator for a year or two, if you're completely new to it, if you've been using it most of your life, hopefully there's going to be something for everyone here. And some of the things that we're going to be covering are things that I'm personally a huge fan of. They're features I'm a huge fan of, and they're things that I've really struggled to learn just throughout the course of my career. So I'm really excited to kind of share this with you. And yeah, we're going to get started. So hello to everyone in the chat. How are you doing? If you have any questions, please do drop them in the chat. And I will answer as many as I can as we go through the stream. And then we will do some more questions at the end. And I'll try and be as helpful as possible. Cool. Right. So you can see on screen, I've jumped into Illustrator already. And I've created a new document. And at the moment, I've got 10 separate artboards. And they're all 1,000 pixels wide and 1,000 pixels high. So we'll go to the first one at the moment. And the first thing that we're going to look at is how to draw a heart. Now this is something that I've done for many years incorrectly. It's something I really struggled with. I used the pen tool, I used brush tools, pencil tools. I really did struggle to draw a heart. And there's a few different ways that we're going to be doing that I'm going to demonstrate now. So we've got our artboard. And we're going to grab the rectangle tool over here on the left. And the first thing I'm going to do is just left click and drag to draw a rectangle. And then I can go to edit, copy, edit, paste in place. And then just rotate this 90 degrees. And then just snap these in place like so. If you want to check if they're exactly snapped on top of each other, you can go into outline mode, which is Command or Control Y, and you can see that they're not. So I like to zoom in several thousand% with the zoom tool, and we'll just shuffle these over so they're in exactly the right position. And you can also use the Align panel to do this as well. Now it's definitely worth switching your smart guides on and having snap to point on and turning off snap to pixel. If it's snapping to points and pixels, Illustrator can sometimes get a little bit confused and it's not always sure what you're trying to snap it to. So I like to go with point and it just snaps any shapes together really easily. So we'll come out of outline mode, Command or Control Y, drag over everything and rotate this 90 degrees. Now this bit in the middle is going to be the dip in our heart, and you can see that I've made this far too large, so I'm just going to drag this down and make this rectangle a little bit shorter. And we'll delete this one, and again do that same process of edit, copy, edit, paste in place. Hold shift to rotate, and again just zoom in. Really close, just check they're lined up. And just align those to each other like so. And if we come back out, we have something like this. Now what we can do is we can select one of these rectangles, and you'll see just inside the edges we have these circular anchor points. And we can actually select these with the direct selection tool, and we can click on one. And you'll see it changes and becomes selected. We can hold shift and we can left click on the one along from it. So we've got these two selected now. And at the top of the screen, you can see we have this box here, corners, and we can enter a corner radius, or we can use the arrow keys to adjust this. And we're only going to adjust it just for these two. So let's go ahead and increase this. Or to make this even quicker, we can just grab these circular points and drag them towards the center. And you'll see when it marks it in red, this is the maximum radius that we can go to, and we have effectively a semicircle on the end there. Now we can do the same with the other one. So just select the shape, select the direct selection tool, left click and hold shift to select both of those anchor points, and just drag towards the center. Now if we jump back into outline mode, that's fine, but we're going to tidy this shape up, and we can do this one of two ways. We can drag over everything, go to the Pathfinder panel on the right, or at the top of the screen, if you can't see it, and just select Unite, which is the top left option, and it will merge those into one complete shape. Or if you're on a newer version of Illustrator, so a CC version, you'll have the Shape Builder tool over there, and you can just go whoosh, and left click, I don't know what that sound was, whoosh, just left click and drag through those shapes, and it will merge them into one shape. So there we go, we have one heart. This is if you're going for kind of a straight edged heart, but what if you want a heart that is a little bit more curved? And this is my personal favorite, if I had to pick one. So we'll start by selecting the ellipse tool and just left click and hold shift to draw a circle. And then we can drag this circle to the right, holding shift to keep it in line and holding alt. And with alt held, it will create a copy. Now this area here, this is going to be the dip in our heart. So the further you adjust the distance for the circles, the lower it will dip. The closer you bring it together, the shallower the dip. So it depends on the style of heart that you're going for. And now we're going to grab the pen tool. And again, go into outline mode, which is Command or Control Y. And you can also press the cap locks key on your keyboard, and it will switch to a crosshairs, which is sometimes a little bit easier than the pen icon. And we're going to click right in the middle here, like this. And we'll hold shift to go straight down, and we'll left click somewhere around here. Next, what we're going to do is go up here, and you can see those smart guides now really coming in handy, and it's snapping to that path there. Now we're not going to go right here, we're going to just hover a little bit up from that and then left click and start to drag with the pen tool. And the goal here is to follow the continuation of the left circle. So if I let go and just go to select, deselect, the goal here is to make this transition with this new line we've drawn just run straight into the existing circle. Now if you don't get it right first time, don't worry, that's totally fine. Just grab that direct selection tool, click on that path, and you'll see you get this handle here, and you can bend this until you get the right angle. So what we can do now is just with the direct selection tool, select that new anchor point we created, hold shift and select the starting anchor point, and just go to Object, Path and Join, and it will join that into a complete shape. And then what we can do is select this shape. I'm not sure what this type of shape is called, but this is what we've created, and we'll just go to Edit, Copy, Edit, Paste in Place, and just drag this over, and then go Object, Transform, Reflect. Make sure you reflect it along the vertical axes and click OK. And now, if we zoom in right the way on here, just to check everything is perfectly lined up. What we can do now is, we're still in outline mode as you can see here. What we can do is press Command or Control Y, we can switch back out of outline mode, and we can see that we have our heart. And we can drag over this, and you can give this a fill, you can give it a stroke. Oh, but if you try and give it a stroke, at the moment it's made up of tons of different shapes. So again, we can drag over everything, and from the Pathfinder panel, select the top left option, and voila, we have one shape. Or we can use the Shape Builder tool and just run it through every segment. And we've now got a heart, and we could then go and apply a stroke to this if we wanted. If you do get any strange little things like this in the middle, so this strange triangle that's appeared, we can jump back into outline mode, and we can see there's a stray anchor point. Sometimes when creating shapes, especially with the shape builder tool, this is just something that happens. If you get any stray anchor points just lying around like this, just grab that direct selection tool, drag over them and hit delete or backspace, and then they are gone. So we could have an outline heart, or we could swap this around and have a fill. And of course, we can go and give these both a color. So we can double click a swatch, turn on preview, and then just adjust these until we get a color that we're happy with. And there we go. There's a couple of different ways that we can draw a heart. Right, let's move on to artboard number 2. Now, in Illustrator, you may already know that you can create a shape and you can round off the corners. Well, in fact, I hope you know this because that's what we just did a minute ago. So you can quickly and easily round off the corners just by using the direct selection tool and grabbing these little circular points in from the edge. So incredibly, incredibly useful. But we can also do this for lettering, or if you've created a shape or if it's a logo or something and you think, I'd love to just see how this looks with rounded corners. In some of the later versions of Illustrator CC, you can do just that. So sometimes I might design a logo and it'll be very, very angular, lots of straight edges, and I just want to see how it looks. So I can create a copy of that logo and then start adjusting the radius on some of the corners and just see how it looks with a little bit more kind of curviness to it. So let's draw a letter first and I'll show you what I mean. Let's just change that color back to black. So we'll grab the rectangle tool and we'll go with the letter T. So I'm just going to draw a rectangle and go edit copy, edit, paste in place, and just rotate from one of the corners and hold shift. And we've got a letter T, and of course just drag over these two segments and combine those into one shape in the Pathfinder panel. And let's just scale this down. So let's just say I've designed a letter as part of a font or a logo or just any shape, and I want to try and preview this with a few more curves without having to actually go and redraw everything from scratch. Well, again, we can hold Alt and Shift and drag out just to quickly get that copy. And with that shape selected with the main selection tool, we can then select the direct selection tool, and you'll see that you get these same little circles in these corners. And we can left click and drag and round those off. So that's one way of doing it, and it will apply this to absolutely everything. But of course, we can select individual corners and round those off fully if we want. Let's go back. What we could do is hold Shift and just left click on all 6 of these circular anchor points inside the shape, ignoring these 2 here. So we could go for something like this. Or we could leave everything very, very kind of angular and with these straight edges and just select these 2 here. And now these are on the outside as well. So this will round off. And you can see again with the red line, it tells you exactly where that maximum radius is. And I'd like to show you something that I think is a little bit cool and a little bit off script. Not that there is a script. So what you could do is create a custom letter like this. We can create that copy, press Command or Control D to repeat that last action. We could then select everything and copy it and paste it in place. We'll rotate it, holding Shift, move it up, and select everything. And again, just copy, paste in place, rotate it 90 degrees, drag over everything, edit, copy, edit, paste in place, rotate 45 degrees, and there we go. We have a snowflake. So You can use this to edit existing shapes, or you can use this to design snowflakes. It's entirely up to you, but that's one way that you can use the direct selection tool to individually select certain points and round these off. And I found this really useful personally when I was designing font recently. I started doing a few letters and I just wanted to see how some of them would look if I added a few more curves in a few places. So it makes it incredibly easy to do things like that. Or if you're kind of wanting to introduce some serifs into something, this is one way that you can do it. So we could take that letter, we could rotate this around, and there we go, we've got a letter I with some rather large serifs, but it depends what you're going for. So having control over all of these anchor points, some of the more recent versions of Illustrator CC, is incredibly useful. And of course you can draw snowflakes if that's what you're into. Okay, so we're going to jump on to our third artboard. This is really, really cool. I love this. This is, we're going to look at gradient logos now. So sometimes you see logos and they have a gradient to them and they blend really nicely over different colors. So a good example would be the Adobe Max logo, the more abstract one that was made out of lots of different triangles, very, very minimal. And it was all made up of gradients. So when you lay a color or any image behind it, doesn't matter what it is, it looks fantastic and it works. So let's start by creating a polygon. So we'll left click anywhere on the artboard. And of course we can specify the number of sides. So we'll go for 3. Now the radius does determine the size, but let's not worry about that because we can just click OK and just scale up from the corner holding Shift. Now what we're going to do is click on the gradient panel on the right. If you don't see that, don't worry, just go over to Window and down to Gradient. And if you click anywhere on that slider, you'll get the default black to white gradient. And of course we can left click on this shape, hold Alt and Shift and drag out. And we can repeat this last action with Command or Control D. So you could keep doing this if you really wanted to. And I think let's rotate this. So we'll select everything and hold Shift and rotate from one of the corners. Now, if I drag over everything, we can change the transparency blending mode from normal to multiply. So if you use Photoshop, these options will seem very familiar. And there we go, we've kind of got a W logo. So let's pretend that this is a fictional company and the logo is a W. We've gone for a really minimalist approach. Now what using multiply does is it just blends those together so they kind of overlap with each other. And we can of course, we'll bring these in a bit. Now if I manually start adjusting this, the spacing of course you can see isn't equal on each. So we'll just select everything and from the Align panel, go to the Distribute Objects section and select Horizontal Distribute Center, and it will space these equally apart. So now if I select this, you can see this is still made up of black and white, and we have the multiply blending mode. So let's just go and add a background color with the rectangle tool. And it's given us a gradient. So let's just go and pick a swatch. We'll double click any swatch. And we'll just adjust this like so. And then go to Object, Arrange, Send to Back. And there you go. Because we have the black and the white, so we've not introduced any color. Whatever color you lay behind this, it will blend in really, really nicely. So if we go back to the swatches panel and we change this global swatch, you can see that this is background color proof essentially, and we can do a whole bunch of different things with it and it looks really cool. And we can of course go back into each shape and we can adjust the rotation, we can reverse the gradients around. So we've got lots of flexibility. Let's try changing the angle. So something like that. And then of course, if you do want to, you can double click on a swatch in the gradient and then go and add colors as well. In fact, what we can do is we can actually use the eyedropper tool. So if we select one of our original shapes that have a black to white gradient, we can actually eyedropper tool this. And it will copy those same gradient settings. And then of course we can go back and start reversing and rotating. Now of course we've introduced a specific color. So if we do start changing the background color, now we've got to be conscious about how these two colors blend together with the multiply blending mode. So if we start changing this background now, which I think looks really cool. So you can see we're not working with just black and white anymore. We've kind of got this really, really dark blue swatch over here that we used to white instead. And now we've kind of got this sort of corally color background in. So those two colors are blending together. Yeah, so I think this works really, really well. So it depends entirely what you're going for, but that is one way that you can use gradients within your logo design to just make something that looks really, really awesome and works with a variety of different backgrounds. You can do this with circles as well. In fact, I mean, you know, there's some fantastic logos out there that use all manner of different shapes. And just combine them in various ways with various colors. And you can even use the same color. And then with the shapes overlap, you've got that multiply blending mode set. Obviously, that's not the most interesting logo in the world. I'm sure what you create will be much better. But anyway, there's a few tricks and tips about how you can use gradients and the multiply blending mode to create logos that work against a whole different amount of backgrounds and that just look really cool. Right, let's move on to our next artboard. Rightio, number 4. Oh, I absolutely love this tool. So if you've never used the width tool before in Illustrator, prepare to have your mind blown. This is amazing and I love this one so much. So I'm going to grab the pen tool and just remove that fill, and we've got a black stroke. And I can left click and left click again, and we'll just drag, and we're just going to draw a nice wavy line. And it wants to continue this line. We can just go up to select and down to deselect, or just press escape on the keyboard. And from the stroke panel on the right, we can increase the weight. And yeah, I mean, it's a line. It looks okay. But we can also use the width tool to adjust the width of the line at different points. So you can see this over here on the left. And I believe you will need a copy of Illustrator CC to have access to the width tool. So let's click this. And I can now hover along this path. And you can see it has a plus symbol. So I can click anywhere along this path and drag up or down, and from that exact point it will become a bit thinner or a bit wider. Or what we can do is we can grab the existing anchor point. So at the moment this shape is made up of 3 anchor points. We've got 1 anchor point at either end and 1 in the middle. So if I hover over this and click, I can of course do the same thing. So we could bring these anchor points at the end in so they become smaller. And once you've created an adjustment point as well, you'll see you get these 2 points either end. Just grab either of those and bring it in. And then we can hover over that middle anchor point. Let's just zoom in on there. And we can then make this wider. So you can see we've adjusted this middle anchor point. So when we hover over it again, we get this line here that runs across the width of the stroke, and we can adjust it from there. And we've still got square kind of edges on the end. So if we just drag over everything and then round off the cap, you get a lovely round finish as well. So this is a great way if you're kind of creating an illustration or some floral decorations or you know, really creative borders. You can draw a lot of your lines just as normal strokes, and then you can go in and really refine the width. For example, this would make a fantastic eyebrow if you were doing the illustration of someone's face, for example. Or we could just hold Alt and drag, and we'll scale this down. Maybe move this up here. And then of course, still go in and adjust the stroke weight. Now, if you've applied some changes with the width tool, and then you go in and you adjust the stroke weight, it will still remember all of the different proportions. So even though we're adjusting the stroke weight now, we're bringing it down, making the stroke thinner, it's still going to remember that the middle is a little bit wider than either end. So we could bring this one down as well. And do something like this. And bring this one down. And we can even go a little bit wild as well if we grab that width tool, and we can just select all manner of different points. And you can really get quite creative with this, actually. I'm not entirely sure where this is going. I have no idea what this is. It looks very abstract, but you can see that you can fully adjust the width of any stroke at various points along that line. Fantastic. So that is the width tool. I absolutely love that one. And when I first learned that, I was honestly blown away, because it's a tool tucked over here that I hadn't actually ever used before. Rightio. Artboard number 5. So this is going to be a little bit similar. We're going to be doing brushes. So again, if I draw, let's draw a spiral. So we'll left click on the line segment tool, and we'll grab the spiral tool. A bit more interesting. So we can left click to draw a spiral, and we can increase the stroke weight. And of course, we've still got that round cap on, just so it rounds off the ends. And in fact, I'm going to create a few different copies of this, because what we're going to do next is going to get very creative. So there we go. We've got 4 different spirals. And if I select the first one and go up to Window at the top and down to Brushes, it will bring up this panel here. And by default, there's a couple listed. But if you go up to the menu icon in the top right corner, you can go down to Open Brush Library, and there's a ton of libraries that come with Illustrator, or you can go and open your own if you've downloaded one. But for example, we can start with Artistic, so we can have access to some calligraphy brushes here. So we could click this, and you can see it applies that effect to our stroke. Now I'm just going to have Edit Undo handy, because we're going to try lots of different effects and just see how they look. And once you've opened up one library, so we're in the calligraphy panel at the moment, we can use the arrows at the bottom just to cycle through all of the different panels. So now we're in chalk, charcoal, pencil, and this is where it starts to get really creative. So we've clicked the first one there, and we've got this awesome effect, And we can even go and adjust the stroke weight. So we could bring this all the way up and create something a little bit crazy if you were going for some kind of pattern, or you can go for something like this. Now you can do this with any shape with a stroke. Doesn't matter whether it's a logo you've drawn. In fact, if you have a logo and you'd like to give it a more pencil drawn look, what you can do is go all the way to the bottom, and we actually have some pencil brushes. So we have pencil, pencil feather, thick and thin. So let's click the thick one. And you can see this does a pretty good job at simulating the strokes of a pencil. Now, of course, you may not get the same texture as you would in Photoshop because this is vector-based software. So if we zoom in really, really far, it's going to look very, very clean. But when you look from a distance, it looks incredibly believable, and we can again go and adjust that stroke weight. Now if you bring the pencil up too thick, of course it's going to not look like a pencil anymore, but we can bring that down. And I think this works most effectively when it's really thin, and if we change the color from black to a darker grey, something like this. And if you have an illustration or a logo or anything that you've designed, you can literally drag over everything, go and apply one of these pencil brushes, adjust the width and the color, and you can turn something that is incredibly clean and lovely and clearly a vector graphic into something that looks a little bit more hand-drawn. Okay, we've got 2 more swirls at the bottom. So we can try a few more of these effects here. So you can see lots of variety. And we can go along, we've got some ink brushes, we've got some at the top here. So we have these spatter brushes. So again, similar to Photoshop, where you can use different brushes like this. If you want to kind of get those spatter ink brushes, they are there. We have fire ash, that sounds pretty cool, let's try that. So there are tons of different brushes, and these are just the ones that come with Illustrator as well. So you can go and, you know, download other ones online. Lots of different brushes. And then we have things like scroll pen. So I'm literally just clicking through these, and you can see some of the effects are pretty crazy. We have watercolor brushes. So you could take an illustration or something that you've created in one format, and then you could apply a watercolor brush to the whole thing. And then we have things that are a little bit cleaner. So we have dashed lines. Let's just increase the size of this. There we go. So we're getting a lot more colorful now. Yeah, and you can even get things like borders. So this is fantastic. Yeah, we're definitely getting a lot more creative now. And as I say, we've got floral patterns. And as I say, this is just what comes with Illustrator. So there are going to be many, many more brush libraries out there. And you can go absolutely wild. Here we go. We have wooden frames. So, oh, I could continue doing this forever. I could literally sit here and play with these forever. So what if you add something like this and you think, oh, I actually want to go and edit this color. At the moment, we still have that black stroke applied. And all we've done is apply an effect to that stroke. So you can see it listed here, geometric one, which is this one. And we can then go to Object, Expand Appearance. And then go Object, Expand. And hopefully it will let us select individual elements of this now with the direct selection tool. And if I go into outline mode, you can see that it's no longer just a line that we did. By expanding that shape, it effectively, what you see on screen becomes the shape. Whereas before it was just a spiral line with a whole bunch of effects applied over it. And you can see if I select this now, there are no effects applied to this. This is just a series of shapes with colors in Illustrator now. And what we can do is we could manually go through and select all of these and change the color, but that's very tedious. I like to use the magic wand tool. Just click on the color you want. And hopefully, let's change it to a different color. We'll pick a different color here, or you can pick a swatch from the swatch panel. And we'll just magic wand this again so it selects every instance of that color within your document. And we'll go and pick a pink. And there we go. That's a really quick way to change the color. Oh, and we've got one more spiral. So let's just go back. Let's go back to our brush panel and we'll do one more. So remember, we go to the menu icon, open brush library, and then pick a category. And once you've loaded one category, you then have access to all of the others just by navigating with the arrows at the bottom. Okay, these are these are very out there, but we do have some more floral ones. we have a flower. Oh, that is excellent. That is excellent. So yeah, lots of fun, lots of playing to be had here. So I really hope you enjoyed that bit, because when I first found out about these and this entire brush library that I didn't know was there, I had a lot of fun messing around with that. Cool. And we've now got blue hearts because we changed the color. So let's change those back to this color. There we go. Okay, right. I'm just going to jump to the chat. Let's do a little bit of Q&A. Okay, Chris asks, isn't there a heart shape? Not to my knowledge in Illustrator, but if there is one, please feel free to let me know. But for me personally, I like to learn how to create different types of heart. And as you saw in the beginning of the stream, we really had a lot of flexibility as well as to kind of, we could control the angle here, the curvature. We could control the dip and how much this did dip or didn't dip. So when you learn how to do it yourself and you need to draw a heart in future, you have a whole different bunch of hearts that you can create, whether it's a straight edged one or a bit more curvy. So there may well be a heart icon feature somewhere hidden away in Illustrator. But for me personally, it's something that I like to do myself from scratch. Lillian asks, if we have Adobe Illustrator CS6, could we follow this tutorial? Some of these, yes. Some of these, you would need Illustrator CC. So being able to select certain corners and round them off quickly like this, you would need Illustrator CC, unfortunately. But then some of the other ones, like playing around with brushes and gradient logos, all of that you can do in many of the previous versions of Illustrator. Gert asks, where can we download the start files, please? So what I'll do is at the end of the stream, I will upload the files together with the course. So once the course is all complete and everything, I'll package up these files and we can get those up so you guys can download what we've created here and start having a play. Barry asks, are you using a stylus or a mouse? Barry, I'm using a stylus. I do have a mouse on standby. But for me, I used a mouse for a large part of my career, and then once I started using a Wacom tablet, this is a Wacom Intuos Pro, I found it difficult to move back. Now the biggest thing that I love about a Wacom tablet is that you can control curves a lot better in Illustrator when drawing shapes and brushes and things. So if I were to grab the brush tool, it's much easier for me to draw this, I don't know what this is, but to do it with a tablet, it's just a much more natural movement, kind of, you know, especially if you're someone who likes to draw or you have drawn a lot before. And I think generally a lot of us, you know, we grow up using pencils and pens, so having a tablet stylus feels very familiar as well. And you get the control of something like pen pressure as well. So, you know, you can set up your stylus and everything. So when you're working in things like Photoshop and Illustrator, if you press a bit harder, the line or the brush that you're using will be more pronounced. If you press lighter, it will be smaller or perhaps fainter. So you get much more artistic control over what you're creating. Now this tablet has a ton of features. I don't use them. I've got them all turned off. Literally, those are the two reasons that I love using this. And I find it difficult to go back to a mouse after using it. Hopefully that's helpful. That's a very long answer to your question. I could have just said yes. Do you prefer Adobe Illustrator or Sketch for designing logos? For me, you know, it's Adobe Illustrator. I'm not sure which version of Sketch you mean, if you're referring to Sketch app, which I think is a lot more for UI design, or if there's another program called Sketch. But for me personally, I'm a fan of the Adobe Creative Cloud, you know, the Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign. I've used a lot of them for a number of years now, and the thing that I like is they all play nice together, but all the tools are familiar as well. So if I'm working in Photoshop, I've got a pen tool. I've got the add anchor point, delete anchor point tools. If I'm in Illustrator, I've got that as well. If I'm in InDesign, I've got it. If I'm in XD, I've got a pen tool. So there's a lot of shapes and icons that represent shapes, like a lot of these shapes as well, that you can find in other apps. So if you're someone that uses lots of different apps, there's a lot of familiarity between them, if that makes sense. But I mean, I've been using Illustrator for years, and some of the tools that they've added, particularly things like the width tool that we demonstrated and the shape builder tool as well, that just make the process of creating things like logos incredibly easy. Or not incredibly easy, but much easier, much quicker. So for me, it's got to be Adobe Illustrator, personally. So Kitten asks, so is it better to use Photoshop for illustration? I'm confused. It depends entirely what you're trying to create. Now the main difference between Photoshop and Illustrator, apart from the tools and other obvious things, is that Photoshop is raster based software. So it's pixel based. If you create something in Photoshop at a certain size, you can scale it down, and it may change as you scale it down. The image might become blurred because it's packing all of those pixels together into a smaller space. Conversely, if you scale it up in Photoshop larger than its original size it was created at, it's going to pixelate. You're going to get a loss in quality. Whereas in Illustrator, everything that you create in Illustrator is vector based. So what that means is that it's made up of all of these different anchor points. So in Photoshop, you can work with anchor points and you can work with vector shapes, but most of what you create, things like photos, any kind of graphics that you put in there, JPEGs, PNGs, they're not vector based because they're not made up of these anchor points. Because this is a shape that I've created with anchor points, I could scale this up to any size And no matter how far I zoom in, it's always going to be super, super clean, super crisp. So it depends on the type of illustration that you're creating. If it's going to be something, you know, that is going to be a lot cleaner, potentially, and you're not going to use as much texture as you might in Photoshop. It depends what you're trying to create. Yeah, I think if your illustration is going to be much more like a painting or something that involves you know, using loads of different brushes and different opacities, then it's definitely worth working on a large canvas in Photoshop. If you're going to be doing something like logo design or perhaps UI design or, you know, illustration, then Illustrator is a good bet. It depends kind of what you want to use it for, what you're looking to do with it. Hopefully that's helpful. Teresa says, this is fun. I'm enjoying what you're demonstrating. Oh, well, good. Me too. I'm loving this. Fantastic. Okay, so we've done the first 5. Next, we're going to move on to how to warp stuff. Let's just go to artboard number 6. So we're going to learn how to warp stuff. Let's grab our type tool, left click anywhere on the artboard, and we'll type some text. Let's type warped. And we can go to the character panel at the top. And we could pick a font. Let's go for Gotham Bold. And I'm going to go to the alignment options here and select Align Center. So this is in the middle. And let's create a few copies, again holding Alt and Shift and dragging. So we'll select the first one and go to Object, Envelope Distort, and Make with Warp. And we've got the preview option checked. Now we can choose the style here as well, so we've got lots of these presets. So let's go for, let's try bulge and see how that looks. So at the moment we are bulging this text horizontally, and we can adjust that slider. So of course we can go up a few percent and you'll see it starts to bulge outwards, or we can go ever so slightly into the negatives and it will go inwards. You can of course go to the absolute extreme and it will go totally bonkers, but we could do something subtle like this, or you could bulge this vertically so it will behave slightly differently. So it really does depend what you're going for. But we can also distort this both horizontally and vertically as well using the sliders. So if you wanted one side to appear larger, like this. So you really can distort these to the absolute extreme, to be honest. But if we go for something like that and click OK, you can see there we've warped the text. And if we click this, we still have all of these options along the top. They're just laid out slightly differently. And we can click on that preset and we can go and change it to something else if we like. Now at the moment, if I press Command or Control Y to go into outline mode, you can see that it's still got this this box around it, these lines. So I can't really change the color or anything. At the moment it's just showing me this grey color, which it's clearly not. So what I recommend is once you've done your warp and you're happy with your text, go to Object, Expand, leave Object and Fill selected, click OK, and then we can switch into outline mode again and you'll be able to see your text. Now remember, expanding anything in Illustrator, essentially what you see becomes the paths of the shape. So this is now made up of all of these different anchor points. And we can still go and adjust these if we really want to go and fine tune that warp or make it slightly differently. But also when we select this now, it has a fill color And we can then go and pick a color, and it will apply that color to the text. So let's go and warp a couple of other things. So we've got arc. So there we go, we'll set the distortion back to 0, and we can bend this up or we can bend this down. And of course you can adjust this to vertical as well. And you can really go to the extreme on this. There we go, that's pretty cool. So of course, remember, once you've got your warp and you're happy with how you've warped your text, you can go and fine tune it up here. That's a pretty cool pattern. I like that. But once you're happy with your warp and you'd like to start adding color to it, possibly getting creative, adding some strokes, maybe some of those brushes we used in the last lesson, we can go to Object and expand it. Leave Object and Fill selected. Click OK. And then we can now get creative with this. So let's go and add some brushes. So we'll swap that fill and the stroke, so we now have an outline. And from the brush panel, a little bit too thick. Let's go for one of the pencil, one of the pencil brushes. And let's pick a different color for the pencil. Let's go for an orange perhaps. And there we go. So once you've warped your text, remember Object, Expand, and then you can start doing whatever you like to it. So there we go, there's a few ways to warp text. I'll leave you to go and have a lot of fun. There's a lot of different warp options and ways that you can do this. But yeah, that's how you warp text in Illustrator. Okay, let's move along. The next one, gradients. Now this is going to be really cool because I love creating things with gradients. We looked at them briefly earlier, so how you can apply gradients with black and white and using that multiply blending mode. So let's just go and create a few squares with the rectangle tool. In fact, we're not going to create squares. We're going to create a spiral because there's something else that I'd really like to show you that is a lot of fun once you know it. So we will just double click the stroke from the bottom of the toolbar and we'll give this a black stroke. Now I'm just going to increase that weight slightly so you can see exactly what I'm doing. And we'll round off that corner as well. So if we click the gradient panel on the right, and typically it would add that default black to white gradient. Now what you can do is you can go in, double click on a swatch on this slider, and just pick two different colors. Now I'm doing this on one shape. If you have a complex illustration or a graphic of some description that has, or if you had multiple shapes like in the logos we looked at earlier, and they all use the same or a similar gradient, and you think, do you know what? I want to change this orange to like a blue color. You've got to double click this, go and find your blue color. That's not the right blue color. Okay, I'll go into the swatch panel. Okay, I've got to fine tune my blue. Then I've got to go back into the gradient panel, go back in, click the newer version. That's not right. Back into the swatch panel. You see it says back and forth. You have to go into the swatch, edit the swatch, go back into the gradient panel. So what I would recommend is when you're starting to create a gradient and you know that you're going to have two colors in it, in this case it's going to be a green and a blue, just create two swatches and make sure you check the box that marked global. Now what global means is that any instance of this color in your document, if you ever go back into this swatch just by double clicking it in the swatch panel and you change this global color, it will update every instance of that color in your document. And you can see that it's a global swatch because it adds this little white tag in the corner. So let's go and create a square. And we'll go and create a star as well. And we're also going to go into our gradient panel, double click on this green, and we're going to add our new green with our global swatch that we created. And I'm also going to double click and turn this blue swatch into a global swatch as well. Now I will need to go back into the gradient panel and just click that gradient swatch. So now what happens is I can go back to the swatch panel, and if I think, I just want to change the green color, I can simply load that swatch, turn on preview, and as I change this, you can see it updates every instance of this in real time. There we go, and I quite like purple, so I'm going to keep that. But if I want to change the blue as well, I simply just load up that swatch, turn on preview, and I can start adjusting it all in real time. So that's cool. That is gradients with swatches and global swatches. So for me personally, most things I do in Illustrator, I just make global swatches because it's just so much easier if I do something, if I'm working on a logo or something and I get so far down the line and I think, oh, I just want to change the color, I just simply change the swatch. I don't have to manually go back in and update every instance of green and change it to purple, for example. Now, if I select this funky looking spiral that I've created, at the moment we can go to the gradient panel and see that the gradient runs from blue to purple. So let's adjust this. We'll bring the blue into the middle and we'll click on our purple swatch and hold Alt, and it will create a copy, and we'll drag that to the other end. So the gradient stroke at the moment is set to the one on the left, apply gradient within stroke. And this is the default option. And it goes from literally from left to right on your shape as we're looking at it. So purple to blue to purple. If we change this to the middle option, apply the gradient along the stroke, it will go from one end to the other and follow the path of the stroke. So it now runs from purple, which is our swatch on the left, and this runs into blue, which then runs into purple at the end. So super, super useful. But then you can also change this one at the end to apply gradient across the stroke. And instead of following the path of the stroke, what it will do is it will run across the width of the stroke. So we have purple going to blue, going to purple again. And of course we can go back in here in the gradient slider and we can adjust how much purple and how much blue there is by adjusting these little midpoints here. If you wanted a thinner glow down the middle, or we could double click that blue and add a different color. So those are a few different ways that you can control the stroke of the gradient. So we can have it running from left to right, following the path of the stroke, or running across the width of the stroke. Okay, so that's gradients, gradients and strokes, and global swatches. Rightio. Next we're on to 3D letters and text. So first of all, we're going to grab the type tool. Now you can do this with shapes as well. It doesn't have to be text. In fact, let's go and type some text. And just scale this up holding Shift. And I'll grab a shape as well. Let's go for a square. So we've got some text and we have a square. And we'll go and give these some color as well. So we'll just let's pick a different color. We'll go for something like this. Again, check that global swatch button. And with this selected, we can go to Effect at the top of the screen and down to 3D and select Extrude and Bevel. And it will bring up this dialog box here. We can turn on the preview button and it will show us how our text looks. Now, it's already got these different values in degrees here. So we have our y-axis, which is vertical. We have our x-axis. Nope, sorry. We have our x-axis at the top, followed by the y-axis, followed by the z-axis, which is rotation, I believe. There we go. So you can rotate this around. So lots of different presets if you'd like to preview it from different angles. Or you can have a custom rotation, and you can drag these sliders, and with the preview box checked in real time you can see exactly how it's going to rotate. Now if you get a bit lost with these sliders, don't worry, you can always just set this back to 0 and then just start adjusting them one at a time, very, very slowly, just to get familiar with how they work. Or you can hover over the actual shape we have over here on the left and grab the different ones. So we could rotate it like this. So it depends if you prefer entering numbers or dragging dials or just grabbing the shape and manually moving it around. Now when it comes to 3D, you've got the extrude depth as well. So if we increase this, you can see it adjusts how much depth there is to our 3D effect. So you can have it very, very shallow or a bit thicker. And we'll go back, and I think I'm just going to increase. So we've got something like this. And you can choose the cap type as well. So typically when I'm creating something 3D, I leave this set at the default option, but you can also add a bevel as well. So you can see this adds a bevel to your text, and you can of course adjust the bevel height. Now if you do go a little bit too far with this, you will see an error pop up and it will say something like bevel self-intersection has occurred. And that's where you've beveled it so much with all the other settings that it kind of goes inside itself and comes out the other side and doesn't really work. So it may just be a case of just dialing it back a little bit if you do see anything come up like that. So lots of different ways that you can bevel a 3D shape, or you can just leave it at none. And then we've got plastic shading selected here. So you can choose various types of shading, whether you'd just like to have a wireframe view. But you can also select more options, and you'll see this extends here as well. So we can even adjust things like the light source. So we can control exactly where the light is coming from and see this update in real time. And we can adjust the light intensity. So we'll keep this nice and bright. The ambient light as well. And if you don't know what these sliders do specifically, or this feels a little bit overwhelming, don't worry, just change one at a time and see how it affects your specific graphic. So you can see some of these aren't really changing too much, but I always like to have the blend steps really nice and high, just because you get a much smoother gradient, a much smoother 3D finish. So I just whack the blend steps up really nice. And you can choose a custom color for the shading as well. So black is the default, but we could change this to something like this. Let's go a little bit darker. Now, of course, the color that we're seeing here doesn't match that. But the reason is because this is the color we're picking, but of course it has all of these different effects applied. So we have different lighting and highlights. So that's how it looks without any shading whatsoever. So if we go and pick something like a blue, so you can see it's adding the blue, but then you've also got all of these different factors that are affecting this blue that we're picking. And then we can click OK, and you'll see in the appearance panel on the right, we then have 3D extrude and bevel listed. And we can turn this effect on and off. So we haven't actually changed the paths of our text. And if I go into outline mode, remember that's Command or Control Y, it still looks exactly the same. It's just letters. The only difference is it has a 3D extrude and bevel effect applied on top of it. And in fact, that applies to pretty much most of these effects that you can see up here. If you add them, it will list them in the appearance panel. You can turn them on and off. You can click back to go into these settings and edit them further, or you can just grab this and drag it to the trash and it will remove the effect altogether. So what if you've created your 3D text and you want to go and edit it, or you want to do something else with it, and at the moment it's just showing this, it's just showing it with the text as it was and then a 3D effect just layered over the top of it? Well, you just simply go to Object, Expand Appearance, and you'll see there it snaps the path to the shapes of the letters, and then Object and Expand. And now what we can do is use the Direct Selection tool to select individual surfaces, and we can go in and change the color. Or we could go in and we could start adding gradients. So we could add some gradients here. We could go in on these edges and add a really dark color. You could add, and of course this one already has a gradient here. So selecting all of these can be quite problematic and quite time consuming, but you can of course make that selection and use the eyedropper tool to sample any existing colors, or you can add a gradient. So again, down here you can use that direct selection tool to drag over everything and then sample a different color. So this is just the way Illustrator handles something like gradients. But then you can of course take your time, go in there and just really work on that 3D effect. But once you've done this with your text, of course you can't go and edit it in the same way from the appearance panel that you could before, but you get a lot more control over it, and you can select all of those individual surfaces and apply whatever you like, whether it's patterns or colors. In fact, let's just try something. If I go back a few steps, so if I go into outline mode, you can see it's made up of loads and loads of lines. This is just how Illustrator handles gradients when you go Object and Expand. But if we select everything, you can see it's all grouped at the moment. We can just ungroup it a few different times from the object menu. And then if we drag over all of these, so you can see we've got all of these selected now. We can try and unite them from the Pathfinder panel, and it will unite them into one shape. And then we could go and apply a gradient to that one shape. So even though expanding them in Illustrator does something completely bananas like this and makes lots and lots of horizontal lines, you can still select all of those lines, unite them together from the Pathfinder panel, and it will merge them into one shape. And once you've got them in one shape like this here, it becomes considerably easier to then apply patterns, gradients to that shape as a whole. So of course you could spend a lot more time going through this and just fine-tuning everything, uniting it all together. And often, you can see here, it often is a case of sometimes zooming in really, really far and just seeing where the issue is, if there's anything that just didn't quite work, and just making sure that you can make that selection. And this is going to be very, very tedious to go through and select this. So sometimes it is just a case, if there isn't an easy way to make the selection without selecting other elements, what I'm doing is just manually going through, holding shift with the direct selection tool, and then using the eyedropper tool just to sample this other color. Now, I'm not going to do this now because, as you can see, this one will take me quite a long time because there's so many different colors in there that I have to do this manually. But the best thing is, if we go back to global swatches, once I've done this once, if I set this color, this purple that I'm using here, as a global swatch by clicking the new swatch icon here, if I do that first and make it as a global swatch, when I go through and painstakingly apply this manually, once I've done that and I've applied it manually, so let's just make sure I select it. So once I've done that for this whole bit of 3D lettering, I don't have to go back and do it again. I can simply just adjust the sliders in the swatches panel, and I haven't got to manually go through and select every single pixel if I want to change it at a later date. So again, that's just me championing global swatches as a huge time saver. Now, we did draw a square down here, but I'm just going to draw an ellipse and show you one more 3D tool before we move on. So at the moment we have a circle. If we grab the direct selection tool and just drag over this anchor point on the right, hit delete or backspace, and we are left with a semicircle. And I can drag over these two anchor points and go to Object, Path, and Join. So it just joins this together into a complete semicircle. And if I drag over this and go to Effect, 3D, and now we try Revolve, we can turn on Preview. Now this is a similar screen, and we can of course adjust all of this if we like, or we can leave this all set at 0. Let's maybe just drag this down. There you go. So you can choose which edge you revolve it around, whether it's the left edge or the right edge. So of course, if we go around the right edge, we've actually created a sphere. So it takes that flat half of a circle that we've created and it revolves it around the right edge, which is this line here, or the left edge, which is this curve here. So I'm just going to show you something really quickly now, and this is going to be very, very rough, but if you took the time to draw yourself a bottle, now please don't judge me, this is going to be a rather terrible, terrible bottle. So of course, if you took the time to properly draw yourself a bottle that actually looks like a bottle, when you select it, you just draw half of it, you do a 3D revolve, and you revolve it around that right edge, turn on Preview, and you can create shapes like bottles. Now this doesn't look like a bottle, or maybe it's a small bottle of a really fine whiskey or something. But of course we can go back in and we can increase those blend steps, and you can see there it changes. It's super, super smooth now. And of course we can adjust the light source. If it will let me. There we go. So just click and drag to adjust the light source. Of course, depending on your computer you're using, as you introduce more blend steps and have a more complex 3D render that you're trying to create, you may need a bit more horsepower in your computer. So we can move this around, adjust all of these settings with the blend steps nice and low. And when I'm happy with what I've created, we can just bump that up then, and then click OK. And of course we can select this, and from the appearance panel, we've got that there on the right. And I'm just going to go back and create that circle again. So there we go, we've got 3D text, and I will finish that later. We've got a 3D sort of bottle, but we also have a 3D sphere. So there we go, that's a little bit of an introduction into how you can create 3D effects in Illustrator. Okay, second to last one, stars. Now this is definitely something worth learning. If you left click and hold over the basic shape tools, you can go down to the bottom and you have the star tool. And I'm just going to pick a color from the color picker. In fact, we should probably pick yellow, I think, because, you know, stars are yellow. And if we left click and drag, we get the default 5-pointed star that Illustrator creates. So we'll create this one. And of course, you can hold shift if you'd like it to snap to being upright. And we have a standard 5-pointed star. What we can also do is left click, and you can do this with most of these shape tools, and you get the dialog box pop up, and you can adjust radius 1, radius 2, and the points. Now radius 1 is the outermost point on the star. So this is a radius 1, this is a radius 1 as well, and this is a radius 1. Radius 2 are the inner points. So this is radius 2 here, here, and here. So the further the distance between these two numbers, so if I increase this and then decrease this, the bigger the distance, the more pointy your star will be. And if we increase the number of points to 15, you can see that we can create lots of different star shapes. Now it doesn't have to just be stars, it can be those kind of star burst things. We can bring this really close together now, so there's only 20 points difference between these two radius or radii, and then you can create something like this. Or if you'd like a slightly different shape of star, something a bit more similar to a pentagram, you can use these specific values, 65.5, 25, 5 points, these exact values, and then just scale it up. And you get something a bit more similar to a pentagram. So you get that pentagon in the middle there, and we could change that color as well. So lots of different ways that you can create stars and starbursts in Illustrator. That one got a bit crazy then, didn't it? We've got loads and loads of stars. I will organize those together, but hopefully you enjoyed that one. And we're going to move on to the last one. The last one. Let's just get this out of the way. Let's get all these stars under control, I think. Come on, Dan. Let's scale them down. Stay within your artboard. Okay. Right, number 10. This is a stitched effect. Now, I love this. I love this. I've used this on projects. It's really cool. And you can do this for text. You can do it for, again, you can do it for anything created in Illustrator. So why not? Let's go with a star. So we're going to do that same pentagram style star. We've got 65.5, 25, and 5. And we'll create the star. We're also going to do it with some text. So we'll type the word stitched. And of course you can use any font for this. It doesn't have to be this uppercase text as well. You can change this from the character panel if you like. Let's go for a slightly different font. We'll go for good old Arial. Stitched. There we go. And let's scale this up. So first of all, we're going to select the star and swap that fill on the stroke. Now I'm going to make this a darker color just so you can see the stitch effect in a bit more detail. And I'm going to increase that stroke weight as well. Now, the way we enable this is from the stroke panel. Now, if you don't have all of these options here, just go to the menu at the top and just go show options. And conversely, you can hide options if you'd like to kind of keep this panel a lot more streamlined. And we're going to check the box saying dashed line. And you can see, of course, this does give us just that, a dashed or dotted line. And you can adjust how it preserves the dash and gap lengths around corners. So you can see here on the right, all of these these corners now have a point to them. And this one here just ignores the corners and just runs the dashed line around the entire star shape regardless. But the trick with this And this is a really clever little trick, is to change the dash and the gap values. So let's set the dash. Of course, we could change this to 100, and you can see it makes it a lot longer. We could change it to 2, and it makes it a lot shorter. We can also change it to 0. And we can change the gap to 40. And select this option on the right so it preserves the exact dash gap and dash length. So these are the specific settings that you want. And at the moment, it looks like that. Even though the dash is 0 point, you can still see a line or a path. But, and this is the magic bit, if you select your shape and change the cap type to round cap, it will become dots. So at the moment, for each of these, we have these lines that are effectively 0 point in width. And then if you change the cap to round, it takes that 0 point and it rounds off one side and it rounds off the other side, which effectively just gives us a circle. Now, if you increase this, it becomes something like this, kind of more of an oval shape or a rounded rectangle. And then all you do is adjust the gap distance, and you can choose how many dots there are, and then you can adjust the size. So you can control the size of the dot and the space or the gap between each of the dots. Now this is pretty cool if you want to create dots. If you'd like to create a stitching effect, which is what we were actually going to do, you just simply increase the dash length. So let's zoom in and we'll adjust this again and maybe increase that gap. So this is a case of just kind of playing around a little bit and seeing what kind of stitching effect you're going for. But then of course you can change that cap, so you can have this kind of effect or something a little bit closer to real life stitching with that round cap. But you can also apply this exact same effect to lettering. So let's change these both to 10. Zoom in nice and close and round these off. And of course you can add more than a single dash and a gap. If you just add these two here, it will only use those two and just repeat those two values. We can of course add lots more, and it will cycle through this entire list, which just gives a little bit more randomness. So let's go and change this up a little bit. Just kind of make these numbers feel a little bit more random. Make sure you've got the text selected before you do that. So I'm just varying them ever so slightly. So you can see that as this runs around the text, it first uses the 10 point dash, the 10 point gap, and then it jumps to the 8 point dash, the 12 point gap. It goes all the way to the end, and then it repeats this over and over again. So rather than just having everything a consistent dash and gap length, you can use this to create a much more believable stitching effect, because it just adds an element of randomness to it. And of course, like everything, we can go and add colors to this. And let's have a look and see if it will let us add brush effects. Oh, sadly not. Sadly not. But there we go. Regardless, we've already had our fun playing with brushes, and we've added a stitch effect to some text and a star. And the best thing about this is this text is all still editable. It's still editable, so we have that flexibility. And this effect, you can just turn it off and on from the stroke panel. And as with a lot of the other things we've created, when you're happy with your text, you've got your stitching effect exactly how you want it, you can go to Object, Expand, and leave Object and Fill checked. Click OK. And sometimes it's a case of just doing it twice. So that's for the stitch effect. Do it again for the fill and the stroke. and this is no longer editable, but these shapes are now exactly what you see on screen. So if you wanted to integrate some other shapes within them somehow, when you start trying to combine things together, if it's for a logo or whatever it is, you can fully combine all of these shapes. So generally, as a rule of thumb, if you're happy with an effect or anything that you've applied in the appearance panel, or whether it's a dashed line, if you're happy with it and you don't want to change it, keep a copy maybe just in case you would like to, but you can go to Object, Expand, or Expand Appearance. Just keep using those expand options until you can't go any further. And then when you come to use this composition, what you've created with other tools like the Pathfinder tools and maybe the Align tools as well, some of the complications you might get, they just won't happen because Illustrator is just seeing what you've created, not just as a path with an effect on it, but as just a standard shape, and it will treat it as such. So if you do get any problems with Pathfinder shapes not combining or subtracting or anything like that, just check out those expand options first. Try those and just see if that fixes the problem. Rightio. Oh, wow, that looks creative. So there we go. That's an overview of the madness that has ensued today. I'm particularly proud of that snowflake over there. I'm just going to check the chat. We'll do a few more questions before jumping off. Matt Burton asks, what's the best practice for adding textures to an Illustrator file? Oh, wow. Okay, so if you want to add texture to Illustrator, something I like to do is grab images of texture online, whether it's something on Google for practice or stock imagery. You can grab things with wood texture, metal texture, any kind of texture, and you can drop it into Illustrator, and then there's an option called Live Trace. Image Trace, there we go, Image Trace in the later versions, and you can trace it and it will trace that that photo of a texture into black and white, and then you can simply select it, go Object, Expand, and then you will have that texture in there. And if you have a shape, for example, you just set the texture to white. In fact, I can try and do this with another tool. So we have the symbol sprayer tool. I did this the other day. Let's have a look. So if we go to the symbols panel, click the menu icon, we can open a symbol library, artistic textures. Here we go. Here we go. I've opened up another can of worms. So we can click this one here, and you can use that symbol sprayer to spray loads of texture, and you can go on for as long as you like. And then go Object, Expand. So again, whether you do Image Trace or you use this symbol sprayer tool, you just expand it again. And this may take a fair bit of computing power. Just go over everything and just group it all together. If it is already grouped, fine, fantastic. And just change that color. There we go, so we have a blue texture. Let's bring our star down. And we can apply the blue texture over the red star. And of course, we're going to change this to white now, so our texture matches the background. So it's texturizing that star. Of course, if we did try and add a colored background behind it, that would be no good because we can see the texture on the background. So if we just select that texture, for me, I like to go to Pathfinder Unite and then Object. This may take a moment depending on your computer's power. I think my poor laptop is going to not like me very much after this. So it may take a moment. And then we can go Object, Compound Path, and Make. What that does is it will take all of these individual little speckles of texture that we've created and just groups them together. So Illustrator will then treat all of this as one shape. And the reason that that's really good is because if we select our star and we then hold Shift and select our white texture, we can now go to the Pathfinder panel and select Subtract. That's this option here. And it should subtract that white texture from the red star, effectively just knocking through the star, and it will allow this green background to show through. Either that or my computer will die. There we go. So we can see the background through, and we now have a complete textured star. So if I drag this over here, you can see that we've done it correctly. We have white showing through here and green showing through here. So there we go. There's a couple of ways you can add texture in Illustrator: image trace, or using the symbol sprayer tool and then grabbing the symbols panel up here from the window menu. Hopefully that was helpful. Okay, let's do a few more. I'm not sure of the name, but someone asks, why not use Corel Draw? I've not used Corel Draw in quite a few years now. I did use it at the beginning of my career. There's nothing wrong with Corel Draw. I couldn't say what they've added since then, but for me, I started learning Photoshop when I was, what, 16? Something like that. Oh, such a long time ago. I started learning Photoshop. And because I became familiar with Photoshop, again, it's what I talked about earlier with that familiarity. You know, I then moved into Illustrator. There were some similarities. So for me, it wasn't like learning a completely new bit of software. So I did use Corel Draw for one of my second job when I worked at a small design and print studio. But when I moved on from that job, you know, I went back to Adobe, and I still did use Adobe because, you know, I just used all of their different pieces of graphic software for different things. They all integrate really easily with each other. And yeah, it just had that familiarity about it. But I'm sure Corel Draw nowadays, I'm sure it's had a bunch of features added to it. So there's no reason why you couldn't use Corel Draw. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, if you have an idea in your mind and the bit of software lets you create it, then, you know, whatever you prefer to use. Again, so yeah, what's the difference between Corel Draw and Illustrator? It just depends on the tools. To my knowledge, Corel Draw, it allows you to create vector shapes and draw all sorts of things in it as well. It just depends. Different pieces of software, different companies making them, different tools. Like, they've both got pen tools, they've both got shape tools and text tools. So there's a lot of similarities, but things like mesh tools and perspective tools and maybe shape builder tools, I don't know if Corel Draw does or doesn't have those, but again, it's just different pieces of software and different features coming from them. Kitten asks, what's the difference between expand and expand appearance? So if I draw a square, and this square has a stroke, and I'll draw another square, and let's go and distort this. So we'll distort it using free distort. So the main difference between these is that expand appearance refers to the appearance panel. So at the moment you can see I've got a free distort effect listed. If I go into outline mode, Command or Control Y, it's still the same square. It just has this distort effect masked over it. It's just like showing that effect. If we actually want our shape to be the shape that we're seeing and then edit the anchor points from that, we do need to go Object Expand. Now you can see there we can grab all these points. The shape is the shape. It's exactly what we see even in outline mode. but it's expanded that appearance. So whereas before it was listed here, now it's no longer listed. So we can't go and edit that free distort anymore. But it does mean that we can do other things like combine these two shapes together. If you try and do these kind of Pathfinder shape combinations with shapes that haven't been expanded, it doesn't always work very well. So for me, I like to go and expand any appearances or anything just before I start combining one shape with another. Now, if you have a stroke on your shape, like this one here, you will get the expand option. So sometimes if you have a shape with an effect and a stroke, you'll have to go expand appearance, then go expand. So we just click expand, and we want to expand our fill and our stroke. So now this just looks like this. Now, of course, this shape didn't actually have a fill, but if it did, it would be expanded and it would be a color that we could then go and select. But the best advice I can give is if you've created something and it's got strokes and it's got effects, whatever it's got on it, what I often do is just go object and I just keep selecting whichever one is available. Just object, expand, expand, expand appearance, expand until it's fully expanded. And then I can just go, okay, I can't expand it anymore. Now I'm ready to move forward. That's probably the best advice I can give. Because, I mean, the difference between these, I didn't actually realize that until sometime last year. I didn't connect appearance, the word appearance here, with the appearance panel. I just didn't connect it. And it was never an issue for me. I just usually go and pick whichever one I could and just expand it over and over again until it wouldn't let me do it anymore. So hopefully that's helpful. Tutu asks, which color mode should we use, CMYK or RGB, for logo design in Illustrator? So for me, it depends where your logo is going to be used. What I like to do personally is I like to always work in RGB to begin with. Just because the RGB spectrum has many more colors than CMYK does. Obviously, RGB is red, green, blue. It relates to the colors that make up your screen display, and CMYK stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. And those are the 4 different inks that I use if you're doing like a full color print run. And the CMYK, or the colors that can be generated on a computer screen, there are many millions more, I believe, than what CMYK ink can reproduce. So oftentimes if you create a logo with your document set to RGB, if you use something, let's try this now. So we'll use something like a crazy bright green. Now, unless it's a specialist ink or maybe like I don't know, a Pantone or something, CMYK just wouldn't be able to print this. It's too bright and crazy. So if I change my document color mode, you can see it finds the closest match and it dulls it down. And of course, if I eyedropper this with the color picker, you can see there that it can recreate this. So we have 46% cyan and 100% yellow, and it can recreate that. If we change the document mode back to RGB, and I try and eyedropper this again, if it will let me eyedropper it. Okay, in this instance, it's saying that those are the values there and it can create that, but this kind of green just can't be printed with CMYK ink. So sometimes in there, or whether you kind of go into, let's go into the swatch panel. See, I have my RGB values here. If I change it to CMYK, you get this, you get 62.66. Now, if you get a decimal point in your CMYK, it can't be printed. So if we change that to 62, again, you can see we've got that dulled down or similar color to that dulled down color that we got before. So if you create your logo in RGB and you've got all your swatches and you want it to be CMYK, firstly change your document color mode type, but then load up your swatches, go to CMYK and just find the closest match. So maybe 0.66, if I bring that up, round it up to 63, so I then know that this can be printed, because if you send something to print with this kind of crazy bright green, it's going to print very differently the other end. So it's always good to just check any design work or artwork before you send it off to print. Now back to your question, for logo design, I like to design full RGB so I get maximum creativity. Of course, if the logo is going to be printed somewhere, then this is something that I do tend to consider. If I know it's going to be printed on the side of a van or signage or a poster or a business card, then it's honestly easier to work in CMYK from the start. So you're not picking all these bright colors, showing the client the bright colors and then going, sorry, we have to dull this down now for these reasons. So just start in CMYK if that's where it's going to be used. If it's going to be like an app or on a website, on-screen display predominantly, or for just personal work, and you want access to more colors, more vibrant colors, stick with RGB. Or you could stick with RGB, but just find something that works within the CMYK spectrum. So the RGB spectrum has all the CMYK colors and then some. It has many, many more. So if you're working in RGB and it needs to be printed, just try not to create a color that cannot be printed just to limitations of science is probably my best advice. Ellis Owens, ahaha, I remember you. Hey Dansky, love your videos, man. Thank you so much, Ellis. I appreciate it. Okay, a few more questions. Ken asks, when should you use symbols instead of regular shapes? It's entirely up to you, to be honest. You have the symbols panel from Window at the top. Again, with the brushes, you can open the symbol library and you've got lots and lots of stuff here. And you can, of course, go other library and install some more. So it depends. If you want to create it from scratch, you go and create it from scratch. If you want to kind of throw in some of these shapes here and use this to go and create a frame, I'm just going to do this really quickly. So just select black as the color and bump up that stroke weight. So I'm just reflecting this. And rotating it round. Of course, I'm sure what you create will be infinitely better than this, but you could use this to create a frame. So if you find a symbol that you like, or you have a symbols library specifically that you like using, then that's awesome. If you want to work from a symbol, again, we're just going to do the whole expanding thing. And now this is just a shape in Illustrator. It's not a symbol anymore. I've expanded that symbol and I can then go in and let's see. Oh no, we can't use the width tool because it's not a stroke, but we can go in and we can edit these anchor points, or we can go in and adjust color. So again, if you do get anything like this, if you try and apply color to a shape, I'm picking a green and it's just looking gray, don't worry, just go to the color guide panel or the swatches panel, pick something that has color, and once you've done that, Illustrator will recognize that it's got color and then you can go and change it. I don't know why this happens, but if you ever get that, you're picking a color, it comes out gray, just use either the color guide or the swatches panel, give it a color, and then you can go and pick one from the color picker. But this is a great way that you can use symbols as a starting point and then just expand them and then go and customize them, build on them, whatever you like, as you like. Hey, Pratibha, I recognize you as well. Thank you so much. Oh, you're welcome, Teresa. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah, I find that as well. I've been using this software for ages, for years, like coming up 12 years this year, and I still learn things every day. I mean, definitely like being an educator, I'm constantly looking to improve myself so I can kind of share that experience, and I'm always learning new things. You know, the symbol sprayer tool, hadn't really used that much until quite recently, and then, you know, used that to create texture. So yeah, just honestly everyone, never stop learning. I mean, I just never stop learning. I love learning, I love teaching. And on that note, that wraps up the end of this stream. So I just thank you so much to everyone for joining. I really hope you enjoyed it. As I say, nice bit of variety here today, something a little bit different than what we normally do. Thank you so much to the moderators as well in the chat, and for everyone for asking so many good questions. So this has been absolutely fantastic. And what I'm going to do is, when the course goes live on Tuts Plus, this will all be packaged up with it as well. And yeah, thank you so much. So as always, I hope you have a fantastic 2018. It's been a pleasure to be here. My name is Daniel White, aka Dansky. Thank you very much and have a fantastic day, and I will see you soon.